Hi everyone, I'm Brian LaRosa with LaRosa's Trains. As many of you already know, MTH electric trains will be permanently closed on June 1st, 2021, after announcing the retirement of its founder and only president, Mike Wolf. Those breaking news of last year were very upsetting to many of us and often painful to the hobby. To be honest, the fact that MTH is going out of business was my worst misadventure in 2020, other than the coronavirus pandemic. One of my biggest concerns is all the significant history created in the catalogs in terms of the products and the technology associated with them. What will happen to the MTH website that has so much valuable information about every single product? A typical catalog not only promotes a particular product, but explains so much history of real trains and occasionally the company itself. There's no question about it because it's fun to learn about what types of trains are modeled after. Now, I don't think COVID 19 caused Mike to retire, but he's been so busy leading the company for 40 years, which is understandably a very long time for him. It is my regret to say that none of the MTH employees are able to take over as the next president. However, if I'm not mistaken, there will be a few spin-offs to continue the parts inventory, marketing, and technical support of the products, but they'll never be the same as the original MTH. Nonetheless, I am sincerely grateful for all the high-quality products it had to offer through the years. For those of you who truly enjoy MTH trains, you need to know some history of this unique brand so that you'll appreciate how it has made an enormous impact in model railroading and why it has been a successfully competitive business. With that being said, I encourage you to watch this video thoroughly before you write anything in the comments section, because some of your questions can simply be answered by viewing the entire video from beginning to end. Now, while I'm at it, I would also like to discuss a few of my personal thoughts regarding the relationship between me and MTH since late 2010. You're about to view the history of MTH, the first chapter of the LaRosa's tribute and guide to Mike's train house. So let's get started. All aboard! Before we get to the birth of MTH, let's briefly discuss the early life of Mike Wolf. It all started in 1973 when he began his experience in the toy train industry at age 12. Mike started working for Jerry Williams, who founded Williams Electric Trains 2 years earlier. The company initially focused primarily on manufacturing reproductions of Lionel pre-war standard gauge tinplate trains. For that reason, it was originally named Williams Reproductions. And now, moving into 1980, Mike chose to establish his own retail business and named it Mike's Train House, which is what MTH originally stood for. However, it wasn't until 3 years later when Williams decided to sell the standard gauge tooling to Mike's new company. Also, the very first MTH catalog was printed as a single black and white sheet of paper. Most of us know that American labor has become increasingly expensive, and I'm sure Mike knew about it too. So, in 1985, he contracted with Korean company Samhongsa to manufacture the products, and South Korea became MTH's first manufacturing location in Asia. Between 1983 and 1987, the tinplate reproductions were built and marketed by MTH. Eventually, it began subcontracting with Lionel to manufacture standard and O-gauge tinplate trains under the Lionel Classics line, which was essentially marketed by the latter. The two companies continued their relationship until 1993, when Lionel stopped offering the pre-war reissues. In the same year, MTH introduced its first O-scale engine, which was modeled after the General Electric -8 diesel locomotive. The next year, the brand's first O-scale steam locomotive was the Union Pacific 4664 Challenger, which was also the first to be equipped with a computerized Proto-Sound System, or PS1, engineered by Quantum Sound Industries, QSI. This product was the basis for the MTH Premier O-Scale line, the first product line since the early tinplate business. By the mid-1990s, MTH became an important contributor to the O-Scale market because not many model trains were accurately built to scale in those prior decades. However, one notable exception was back in 1937 when Joshua Lionel Cowan introduced the meticulously detailed scale model of the New York Central Hudson steam locomotive. In 1995, the RailKing O-Gauge line was created to offer the less expensive toy trains for customers who don't care so much for realism and those who don't have sufficient amounts of space for most Premier engines and rolling stock. At the same time, MTH expanded its production capacity in China, the next Asian country. By the next year, RailKing also began selling ready-to-run train sets, as well as accessories including structures, people, and vehicles, some of which are built to scale. In 1996, MTH rejoined the tinplate market by creating the Tinplate Traditions line, based on Mike's original business from the 1980s. The Tinplate Traditions engines were typically offered in two options, traditional and contemporary. The latter was built with the same Proto-Sound system available in both Premier and RailKing engines. In 1997, MTH opened the familiar headquarters building at 7020 Columbia Gateway Drive in Columbia, Maryland. In fact, I once visited that distinctive structure decorated with train tracks around to see the trains running inside the company's fabulous showroom in 2013 when I was 17 years old. MTH debuted its first O-Gauge track system called RailTracks, which features a roadbed texture. RailTracks was also introduced in HO scale, S-Gauge, and even standard gauge. Additionally, MTH released another system called ScaleTracks for 3-rail O-scale. Moving into the 21st century, MTH was in the process of engineering a more advanced sound electronics package, as well as its first command control system that would replace the existing PS1 technology. So, in 2000, the Premier Pennsylvania 442 E6 Atlantic became the first steam locomotive equipped with the new Proto-Sound 2.0 electronics, or PS2, and the ability to be controlled by the MTH Digital Command System, or DCS. However, DCS was not yet available until 2002, when the new remote control and command base set was delivered to unlock some of the advanced features on PS2 engines. In 2001, MTH announced its first G-Gauge product line called RailKing 1 Gauge, which offers trains that can be operated outdoors in a world of garden model railroading. The PS2 system became a standard feature on all 1-gauge engines built at that time. In 2005, MTH debuted yet another sound electronics package called Proto-Sound 3.0, or PS3, which was initially offered on its first HO scale engines. PS3 allows the locomotives so equipped to be compatible with DCC, which stands for Digital Command Control, with the help of their special decoders. By 2011, PS3 effectively replaced its predecessor, PS2, and became standard on all other product lines, especially Premier and RailKing. Newer O-scale locomotives from the former can now be controlled with DCC when in 2-rail operation, typically. In 2009, MTH received a 10-year license to produce standard and O-gauge tinplate trains with the accurate Lionel and American Flyer logos under the new Lionel Corporation tinplate line. By the way, the original Tinplate Traditions line continued to offer reproductions of non-Lionel items, such as those originally made by Ives and Dorfan. 3 years later, S-Helper Service, an S-Gauge manufacturer, was closing down when its two owners were retiring. As a result, MTH chose to enter the S-Gauge market by acquiring the assets of Helper Service, including several toolings of locomotives and rolling stock, as well as the S-Trax system. In 2014, German model train manufacturer Marklin granted a license for MTH to offer a replica of a tin-plate model building based on the gorgeous Leipzig passenger station. However, the only Marklin tinplate items ever offered were the Leipzig station and its accessories such as platforms and boundary walls. In a world of smartphone technology, 2015 was an important year for MTH, so the DCS Wi-Fi module and the app were officially released, so the trains can be controlled by their smartphones or tablets. Throughout its 40-year history, MTH has cataloged thousands of different high-quality items from all of its product lines, and it has spent millions of dollars in new toolings and technology to make itself bigger and better than before. More importantly, it has been a very well-respected company in terms of customer service and quality control. In other words, MTH would certainly not be a successful business if it wasn't for Mike Wolf's love of trains. Since I normally prefer O-Gauge, let's dive deeper into the Premier and RailKing lines. The Premier line represents the most realistically detailed engines and rolling stock, built in their accurate 1:48 scale proportions. They are also usually offered in 3-rail and 2-rail options, but up until 2004 or so, earlier MTH O-scale engines could not be used interchangeably for either track system. Since that year, though, most of the newer Premier locomotives now have a special feature called Proto-Scale 3-2, which allows a 2-rail engine to run on 3-rail track or vice versa with a simple flip of a switch. This allows some 3-rail O-scale modelers to run more realistic 2-rail engines, such as diesels equipped with fixed pilots. It should be noted that the scale wheels in 2-rail diesels can be replaced by the versatile high-rail wheels that are available in a conversion kit, and this is highly recommended for best performance on 3-rail track. While Premier O-scale trains are amazingly detailed, there are a couple of drawbacks that you should be aware of. First of all, they are very expensive, mainly because many of their details are separately applied. This means that they have to be added by hand once the product is fully molded, so labor is a very large factor of the cost for each item. And second of all, most Premier products are so big that they generally require wider curves in order to run properly. For that reason, you need a very large space to install such wide curves, and you must make sure that your layout meets the minimum curve requirement, which is provided in the info of each O-scale item and should be verified before purchasing. Now let's move on to the RailKing line. As mentioned earlier, it represents smaller and less expensive O-gauge trains and is geared towards people who are on a budget, have less space, and/or prefer play value instead of realism. In fact, most of my MTH engines and all of the rolling stock from that brand are RailKing, because I personally don't care about being a scale modeler. I just want to have lots of fun, which is the basic definition of play value. In other words, I wanted my layout to be utilitarian rather than luxurious, so to speak. Whenever MTH introduces a new type of locomotive, it traditionally starts off as a Premier model, for example, the Norfolk Southern SD60E diesel, but that's not always the case. Some diesel switchers, as well as the Aero train, were actually inaugurated as RailKing models. Although the RailKing line focuses primarily on less realistic toy trains, it is divided into several subcategories depending on their scale proportions and details. There are 3 groups that come to mind. Number 1, while most RailKing products typically require 031 as the minimum curve, Some can actually run on curves as tight as 0.27 without any problems. These are classified under the Rugged Rails series and are perhaps the smallest O-gauge trains from MTH. Number 2, some RailKing engines are built to scale, so they fall under the RailKing scale line. Interestingly, some models in that category were originally offered as premier items. The best example to illustrate is the GE C30-7 diesel, which I do have in my fleet. This particular one is a premier locomotive made in 1994. However, later offerings of the Dash 7 are now RailKing scale because their details are not as fully realistic as newer O-scale engines in today's standards. And number 3, there are some RailKing items available with a few extra details, including those that are separately applied. The items are categorized under the Imperial series. A few examples include the SD70 ACE and ES44 AC diesels, as well as articulated steamers like the popular 4884 Big Boy. Despite the lack of realism, RailKing is still a fun-filled tradition for many MTH fans like me, and always will be. In fact, it has even sold many trains in greater numbers than what Premier has done. Some people say MTH isn't quite as good as Lionel with respect to innovation, but there are several achievements that have made the former a little bit better than the latter. Most MTH items tend to cost less than those by Lionel. For instance, believe it or not, the Vision Line Big Boy was originally offered at a retail price of just under $2,700. That's the most expensive O-scale engine I've ever seen. In contrast, the price of the most recent rendition of the MTH Premier Big Boy is close to $1,700 as of last year. Wow, that's a $1,000 difference. However, the MTH version does actually have the smoking whistle, just like the Lionel version. More interestingly, a lot of Premier specialty sets were sold for $100 more than the locomotives by themselves, although newer sets may cost $150 more. So, if you're buying a 4-car passenger set that includes an engine, you're getting 4 coaches for $100. That's $25 per car. Unbeatable. Many Lionel legacy-equipped engines typically offer more luxurious features than MTH engines. With that being said, if you want some of the most awesome effects, buy Lionel. But if you're on a budget and don't care about those innovative features, buy MTH. It's sort of like purchasing an automobile by comparing a more expensive, elegant Toyota to a cheaper, utilitarian Honda. While many MTH Premier items appear to be more affordable, they are often more accurately detailed than Lionel O-scale items. To best illustrate this issue, here's a brief comparison. A lot of Lionel diesels feature die-cast trucks with modestly detailed side frames, which are mostly molded in. On the other hand, a typical MTH diesel also has metal trucks, but with a lot more separately applied details, such as brake cylinders, pipes, and so forth. That gives a more realistic look. Now, I'm sure some of the newer Lionel engines, other than the Vision locomotives, may contain separately applied details. And yes, the Vision line definitely offers products that can be extremely well detailed, like the Big Boy. Despite its latest O-scale trains, Lionel was probably several years behind MTH in terms of advanced detailing. MTH has effectively improved the design of its own models and never came back to the older design that would otherwise look similar to an ordinary Lionel model. It also avoided cutting corners on its Premier engines, especially those in freight and passenger sets, while keeping the prices reasonable. Let's talk about MTH's ready-to-run sets, but before we get to that, I would like to discuss some facts about Lionel sets. Until the dawn of command control, virtually all starter sets were conventional with a traditional transformer. Lionel continued to produce conventional sets until 2013 or so, when it introduced the new Lion Chief remote control system. Unfortunately, those sets equipped with Lion Chief are not compatible with the top-notch legacy system. They don't even have the ability to operate in conventional mode, although the Lion Chief Plus engines do. Back to MTH, one of the nice things about its own starter sets is direct compatibility. Since the digital command system came out in the early 2000s, all MTH starter sets have the same Protosound 2 or 3 electronics and the same DCS functionality as in separately sold locomotives. Because of this, if a hobbyist wants to expand his railroad empire with a new control system, there is no chance of leaving an MTH RTR set behind. It should be noted that some of the advanced features on these command-equipped sets can only be accessed with the DCS remote or the smartphone app, along with the Wi-Fi module connected to the track interface unit, TIU. Alternatively, there have been some RailKing starter sets and separate engines with a non-DCS option called LocoSound, which contains much fewer sounds than PS2 and 3. During the 1990s, the O-gauge products without the PS1 system had just a whistle or horn. When it comes to starter controls, early RailKing RTR sets included a conventional transformer, specifically a power supply brick that is isolated from the Z controller panel. Later sets came with the wireless infrared IR remote control and its receiver, which were succeeded by a similar IR system called the DCS Remote Commander, the most inexpensive version of the regular DCS system. In 2017, MTH introduced a cheaper variant of the Wi-Fi interface unit, WIU, for the newer RTR sets. This is called the DCS Explorer TIU, which translates Wi-Fi signals from the free mobile app on your smartphone or tablet into commands for your train. However, the handheld remote commander set continued to be offered separately for those people who don't have a smart device. Lionel's recent Lion Chief starter sets feature an engine with Bluetooth technology on board for operation with your everyday mobile device. In contrast, MTH's sets are exclusively Wi-Fi because it provides a longer signal range than Bluetooth, which is not present on any RailKing engine. The DCS Explorer unit is compatible with PS2 and 3 locomotives and can run up to 3 of them on the same track. However, the DCS TIU and WIU are required for full access to all of the advanced features on any MTH engine. The app must also be upgraded to either the standard version for $5 or the premium version for $25. I personally recommend the latter because it allows you to take advantage of not only the DCS features, but also the operation of TMCC/legacy engines and conventional engines, as well as accessories connected to the Accessory Interface Unit, AIU. The MTH DCS system definitely contains many features that Lionel's Trainmaster Command Control and legacy systems don't have. First of all, the TIU can easily run conventional engines, such as those equipped with PS1, without requiring extra hardware, because TMCC and Legacy cannot run such engines unless a separately sold Power Master is present. However, the MTH command base is divided into 4 channels, 2 fixed voltage and 2 variable voltage. The fixed channels are intended to operate command-controlled engines, whereas the variable ones can be used to operate conventional engines. I've been running non-command locomotives wirelessly with the DCS remote and later the app for years since I purchased the system, so this is a very reliable feature. Secondly, when it comes to accessories, TMCC and Legacy require a lot of different modules for specific purposes, such as activating accessories, switches, and blocks. On the other hand, the DCS system only needs one device to activate accessories, the AIU. This creates a much simpler wiring setup than a typical TMCC system. Lastly, and most importantly, the DCS remote and app are cross-compatible with any Lionel command engine, but only if the TMCC or legacy command base is connected to the TIU. Both of Lionel's systems can also operate an MTH engine in conventional mode, assuming the Power Master is available, but the advanced DCS features may not be accessed. With everything explained, the DCS system allows the operation of TMCC and legacy engines with one remote. For that reason, there is no Cab 1 handheld required. It should be noted that some of the legacy features are not available in the DCS handheld, although MTH has promised that those advanced features may possibly be accessed through the app, which has several major components that are absent on the physical remote. Despite its advantages over Lionel, the DCS system kindly offers the flexibility to run multiple brands of 3-rail O-gauge trains, be they MTH, TMCC, Legacy, or conventional. Now we'll move on to the Afterlife of MTH following its June 2020 closure announcement. As mentioned in the beginning of this video, Mike Wolf decided to retire after serving 40 years as president of the company. As a result, there are no more catalogs published later than 2020. Since then, MTH has offered a lot of uncatalogued items during its last months in business. As far as I understand, the warranty policy for the most recent products will be held by the Authorized Service Center network until April 2022. At the same time, MTH has also discontinued some of its electronic products, such as the big Z4000 transformer, and especially the DCS handheld remote and TIU, along with the WIU. The new WTIU is announced to replace these existing products and will not accept the radio signal from the handheld. This is the first major DCS system to be strictly Wi-Fi and to require a smart device for wireless operation. Last December, MTH contracted with Cabin Fever Auctions to sell off lots of showroom and archival items that have been stored in the Columbia headquarters and warehouse for years. By the end of the next month, the HO and S-Gauge assets were effectively acquired by ScaleTrains.com, a very young model train brand, which was founded in 2015. Perhaps a more significant change has happened in March of this year when some of the premier O-scale toolings, as well as a few RailKing accessory assets, were to be purchased by Atlas, one of several third-party brands in the O-gauge market. To my knowledge, not all types of premier locomotives and rolling stock are being planned at present. Neither are the RailKing trains themselves. However, the Protosound 3 electronics line has also been successfully acquired by Atlas, so I'm sure this includes support for the DCS hardware and the mobile app. Last year, MTH initially planned a spin-off company to continue holding the electronics assets after the train business closes, but that's all going to change as of right now. Now, I didn't know much about Atlas, but I think it'll become a better company than before in response to the closure of MTH, because it has been offering 3-rail O-scale engines equipped with Lionel's TMCC system as opposed to Legacy. That's why I used to consider that brand as a third party, because of its dependence on an existing control system. Although Atlas does offer 2-rail O-scale trains, TMCC is more intended for 3-rail operation. I hope it will also have the rights for Protoscale 3-2 so that both the 3-rail and 2-rail options of each engine can have the same PS3 sounds on board, regardless of your track system. While Atlas produces mostly O-scale locomotives and rolling stock with exquisite details under the Master Series, I believe there are some traditional O-gauge trains from another line called Industrial Rail. There are even some of the less detailed but more affordable scale models under the Trainman line, sort of like the RailKing scale line mentioned earlier. Speaking of RailKing, I do wish that Atlas should consider announcing the former MTH 031/027 gauge products, but if it isn't possible, there is another scenario that may come to mind. Bachmann can be a potential buyer because it does manufacture traditionally sized trains due to its acquisition of Williams. So it would be nice if it had the opportunity to purchase some RailKing assets. While MTH has sold off its HO, ESSA, and Select O-gauge toolings to both scale trains and Atlas, I'm not sure about the G gauge or the tinplate product lines. I always love the gorgeous pre-war reproductions from Tinplate Traditions and Lionel Corporation. I'm lucky to have the O-gauge Blue Comet replica with Lionel logos on it. MTH has done an excellent job making tinplate trains for many years, and they'll be terribly obsolete. Sadly, the company announced its discontinuation of Lionel branded products in 2019 when the license has expired after 10 years. Now, I know some of you may disagree, but I think Lionel should acquire the tinplate toolings, some of which are fully original. So I imagine that the 121-year-old company would get these ancient molds back to life after being off the line for many decades. Who knows? Maybe Lionel can add Legacy or Lion Chief Plus 2.0 on a tinplate engine while recreating the glory days of model railroading prior to World War II. Not long before MTH received the license, Lionel did offer a few tinplate trains under the pre-war Celebration series, but that's another story. Almost all MTH items look very nice, but I do have at least two pieces of criticism, both before and after the announced closure of the company. Uh-oh, here comes political polarization. In autumn of 2019, MTH announced two RailKing handcars based on the 2020 United States presidential election involving Republican President Donald Trump and his Democratic opponent Joe Biden, the former vice president. These were later offered in the 2020 Ready to Run catalog, but it wasn't until Biden became the Democratic presidential nominee. In the 2020 Volume 2 catalog, MTH expanded its RailKing election series with the diesel and caboose set, along with some additional rolling stock. Initially, I was not happy about these politically themed products, considering that they can potentially anger customers, because politics is an extremely controversial topic and can easily raise tensions between people, even in a world of model railroading. However, after hearing about Mike Wolf's retirement, I decided to order one of the presidential election train cars as my last new purchase from MTH. Now, in an effort to protect my privacy, I won't tell you which one it is, ever. You can try to guess, but please keep it to yourself. I just wanted to buy one of these entirely for collection purposes, not to endorse either candidate. A word of warning, posting political discussions on this video is prohibited by the LaRosa's Trains YouTube channel. Any inappropriate comments will be removed and/or reported, so please be respectful. Although Trump lost the election, the retiring Mike Wolf chose to offer some RailKing post-election political trains primarily based on the now former US president. To make things more absurd for some of you, there are 4 different items decorated in the Trump 2024 paint schemes. As a side note, however, there are 4 Biden boxcars with ballot boxes, but that's pretty much it for those of you who voted Democrat. What's politically unequal, in my opinion, is a couple of MTH accessories that appear to be pro-Trump, not a single one supporting Biden. The first is a fake news outlet building with a CNN logo on it. I have seen a Lionel fake news stand, but it doesn't necessarily use an existing mass media logo, not even a biased one like Fox News or MSNBC. I think it's just for humor. The other MTH building is the Sleepy Joe's mattress store, which suggestively appears to be an unfairly insulting opposition to Biden. Now, I'm not trying to say that I hate Trump, nor that I'm a big fan of Biden. The reason I personally find them irritating is that making political trains and accessories like these is just not a good idea, in my opinion. If I were Mike Wolf, whether as a supporter for Trump or Biden, I would think twice and understand that despite its impact on real railroads, politics can cause damage to people's feelings and possibly breakups from friends, especially those who are hobbyists. I could also practically make a more politically balanced selection of items, not just the Trump 2024 trains. Now, I know MTH is trying to make a profit, even though Mike is retiring, but we should remember that there's always a countless number of possibilities to create and market non political products in the model train industry, so don't get me wrong. All right, I hope my criticism was constructive and neutral, but that's enough talk about politics. We just covered the history and many details about MTH, so now I'm going to mention my personal thoughts about it. And by that, I mean how the company has heavily influenced my life as a train enthusiast. Because model railroading can generally be an expensive hobby, I do have a scenario explaining what I could have done if I chose not to spend so much money on toy trains, or if it wasn't for MTH's existence. In an effort to overcome my depression about the company going out of business, I spent a lot more time thinking about real trains than model trains, except that I took advantage of my membership for the Lionel Collectors Club of America by viewing its incredible digital archive full of vintage catalogs from the pre-war, post-war, and modern eras. But other than that, I probably consider myself to be a generic rail fan. When it comes to railroad media, I have been a subscriber of Trains Magazine since fall 2019. In fact, Combach Media opened its new Trains.com website earlier this year to offer more advanced benefits for those people who are interested. This is called the Unlimited Membership, which I did join about a couple months ago. One of the greatest features on the new website is the digital magazine archive access, containing not only Trains Magazine, but also Classic Trains, the one that represents vintage railroading, as well as modeling magazines, including Model Railroader, Classic Toy Trains, and Garden Railways. From what I observed, unlimited members can even get the earliest access to the newest issues of each publication in the archives. I guess there's no need for a subscription to either magazine. Another exclusive benefit is a digital library of select hobby books, including two of my favorites: The Guide to North American Steam Locomotives and The Guide to North American Diesel Locomotives. By the way, I also enjoy Trains Magazine's annual issues called Locomotive, which are also my favorites, ideal for reading some information that isn't covered in the guidebooks. Both of these books are useful for train spotters and scale modelers, so I highly recommend them. Like I said earlier, I'm not into realism with toy trains, but I am a meticulous spotter because I can clearly identify the types of diesels that are currently in service whenever a train approaches. For instance, most of Amtrak's passenger trains are typically led by a General Electric P42 or a similar locomotive from the Genesis series, although this type will eventually be replaced by the new Siemens ALC42 Charger for long-distance services. I believe that the guidebooks like this one represent a virtually complete collection of locomotives, especially those that haven't existed in the O-gauge world, or even in any sizes such as HO and N-scale. Speaking of collections, I'm currently seeking to collect more of the locomotive back issues all the way to the first one from 2006. Some of them will be in print, while others will be digital, so I'll end up with a mixture of different formats, but it doesn't matter, although I personally prefer the digital issues if they're available. With everything I've just discussed, I could have been happier with just railroad media like the magazines so that I can save as much money as possible. You don't have to spend a fortune on model railroads when you just want to enjoy trains in general. However, I do have at least one major consequence if I don't own any electric toy trains. Most of the videos in my YouTube channel focus primarily on O-gauge trains, especially those made by MTH. Without them, I could have ended up with much fewer videos online, but I still have others that are not necessarily related to that topic. I have uploaded videos on railroad spotting, tourist trains, and even my Thomas the Tank Engine media library and merchandise. Now, a lot of non-experts have been sending rail fans and scale modelers a frequently asked question: what is your favorite train? Well, in my case, I don't have an actual favorite. I like all types of locomotives for different reasons, and I mean different, be they steam, diesel, or electric. For that reason, you can describe me as an unprejudiced train spotter. Because of my imaginary life without model trains, you're probably willing to ask me the following question: why did I choose to join the hobby in the first place? Well, I have lots of reasons to consider, but let's narrow them down to the biggest and most relevant answers. First of all, to the best of my memory, my very first exposure to electric toy trains as a little kid took place at a floral shop called the Garden Factory in Rochester, New York. During the Christmas seasons, there's a beautifully detailed G-gauge layout, and I was indeed attracted to it. Secondly, I used to be obsessed with a very fantastic children's video series called I Love Toy Trains, produced by TM Books and Video. I've learned so many things about this special hobby from these videos, and yes, they do show quite a lot of MTH trains. At the end of each episode, there's even a commercial of MTH, which is how I first heard of that brand, I think. I also have a TM video documenting some layouts, including the showroom, that feature the same brand of trains. Additionally, a lot of I Love Toy Trains episodes feature some MTH Proto Sound 1 effects from TM's sound library, to my knowledge. For those of you who've seen I Love Toy Trains, if you want to hear some PS1 sounds, just do a YouTube search and you'll get a good impression of them. Although TM Books and Video is my favorite train video producer, I do enjoy watching train movies from other producers such as Pentrax, Greg Scholl Productions, and Green Frog Productions, to name a few. In fact, I did explain the whole story about my interest in TM on the LaRosa's Trains website, so more information can be found there. And then finally, I actually inherited a couple of old post-war train sets from two of my family members. The first is an American Flyer S-gauge set that my dad used to play with when he was a lad, and the second is a Lionel O-gauge set that belonged to my uncle, who is my mom's brother. I believe we have the table designed to run my dad's train, but we don't have enough space to set it up at present. However, because my uncle's train is O-gauge, I will definitely run this on my layout. Unfortunately, I don't think his engine is working right now, but hopefully I'll find the time to send it for repair in the near future. Speaking of family, my dad told me that his maternal grandfather, interestingly, worked on the railroad as a hostler. For the uninitiated, a hostler is a historical term that's defined as an employee who operates locomotives within the confines of an engine house for maintenance and repair. My great-grandfather lived until around 1950, so he probably served his career during the days when steam was still king. With that being said, I might have inherited his genes full of train enthusiasm. By the way, I used to play with my Thomas and Friends wooden railway toys, which are now stored in my attic until further notice. Otherwise, you can learn more about them on my website. Well, that pretty much completes the LaRosa's tribute and guide to Mike's Train House. I hope that you've enjoyed what sets MTH apart from any toy train brand, and that it gives you an idea about the differences between this and its chief competitor, Lionel. Actually, I like both companies for, again, different reasons. Now, here are a couple of closing notes before I end this video. First of all, I painstakingly done lots of research in an effort to make this tribute as factually accurate as possible. I deliberately waited until this month to make this video instead of having to do it too early after MTH's closure announcement, because we never knew what was going to change until now. For that reason, I hope you'll describe my video as the most meaningful documentary concerning the current status of MTH. And second of all, as a behind the scenes note, what's probably the most time consuming process for me is to write an extremely long script so that I can speak more fluently to make this production hopefully better than most of my previous YouTube videos. In addition to my talking head through the webcam, I then use my computer's audio recording software to record my voice and mix it with lots of images you've already seen for the best illustration of each subject within this video. Okay, to end the entire documentary, I'm going to play a whistle as a farewell salute to MTH with a RailKing Pennsylvania 460 steam engine, my very first O-gauge train that I received for Christmas nearly 11 years ago. Until then, good luck in your retirement, Mr. Wolf, and goodbye, Mike's Train House. We'll miss you very much. Thanks very much for watching. I'm Brian LaRosa, and I'll see you next time.